Inside the crowded courtroom, a wave of chaos crashed over the proceedings as a stray dog suddenly burst in, barking loudly 3 times before settling down in the center of the room. Just when the air seemed to thicken with confusion, something happened that left everyone frozen in disbelief. What could this mysterious creature be trying to reveal? The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the most talked-about trial of the year unfolded, a high-stakes legal battle that had captivated the entire town for weeks. Every seat was filled, with reporters feverishly scribbling notes and spectators leaning forward, eager to catch every word. Judge Martha Campbell, a seasoned magistrate known for her unyielding authority, sat at the bench, her gavel resting in her hand, ready to command order. The defendant, a prominent businessman accused of embezzlement, remained stoic, flanked by his legal team. On the opposite side, the prosecution prepared for its final argument. Then, the heavy oak doors creaked open. At first, no one noticed, but the quiet padding of paws across the tile floor soon drew everyone's attention. A stray dog, thin and matted, trotted into the courtroom, its coat dusty and ribs faintly visible. Despite its condition, the dog moved with an unmistakable air of confidence. It stopped in the center of the room, its eyes scanning the faces of the crowd. The room fell silent. Even Judge Campbell, known for her stern control, paused mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Before the bailiff could step forward to usher the dog out, it let out a sharp bark. Heads turned. The bailiff hesitated. The dog barked again, louder this time, its unblinking gaze fixed directly on the defendant. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Whispers buzzed. What was a dog doing here? And why was it barking at the defendant? Before anyone could act, the dog barked a 3rd time, each bark echoing through the courtroom like a command. Then it sat, its tail swishing ever so slightly, as if signaling that its work was done. The defendant shifted in his seat, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the weight of the dog's unflinching stare. Judge Campbell raised her gavel to restore order, but before she could speak, the bailiff gasped and pointed to the dog's collar. A tiny, rusted key dangled from it, catching the harsh fluorescent light. The room froze. What was this key, and why did the dog seem so intent on being here at this precise moment? Tension electrified the atmosphere as everyone waited, breath held. Judge Campbell's eyes remained fixed on the stray dog, its tail barely moving. The key glinted under the lights, casting reflections on the curious faces in the crowd. For the first time in her long career, Judge Campbell found herself at a loss for words. She leaned slightly forward, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk with a mix of uncertainty and intrigue. "Bailiff, secure the dog," she commanded, her voice breaking the stunned silence. The bailiff hesitated, then cautiously approached the dog. The stray didn't flinch. It simply watched him, its gaze never leaving the defendant, David Hollis, the wealthy businessman accused of embezzling millions from local charities. Hollis shifted nervously in his seat, his mask of confidence faltering under the dog's gaze. "What in the world is going on here?" the defense attorney demanded, rising from his chair. "This is absurd. Remove this animal immediately." The prosecutor remained silent, her attention focused not on the dog, but on the defendant. Elaine Morgan, known for her sharp instincts, narrowed her eyes at Hollis. She could feel his discomfort. He was unraveling. Meanwhile, the bailiff reached the dog, kneeling to inspect its collar. The dog sat still, almost as if it understood the gravity of the situation. The bailiff removed the small key and held it up for Judge Campbell to see. "Your Honor, this key was attached to the dog's collar," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. A key? Judge Campbell asked, her brow furrowing. What does it unlock? Before anyone could answer, the dog stood, its movements deliberate, as though it knew exactly where it needed to go. It walked toward the defense table, its steps slow but purposeful. Gasps echoed through the room as the dog stopped directly in front of Hollis, sitting once more and letting out a low growl. Hollis recoiled, his face draining of color. His hands gripped the edge of the table tightly, his knuckles white. What is this? A stunt? Hollis's lawyer shouted, his voice rising in anger. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Remove this dog at once. Judge Campbell raised a hand, silencing him with a sharp gesture. Enough, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Bailiff, secure the dog and move it to the side for now. Let's get back to— Wait, Prosecutor Morgan interrupted, rising to her feet. Your Honor, may I inspect that key? It could be crucial to the case. Judge Campbell hesitated, then nodded. The bailiff handed the key to Morgan, who examined it with care. Her sharp eyes widened slightly as she turned the key over in her hands. There, faintly etched into the metal, was an emblem she recognized from the case file. This emblem, Morgan said, holding the key up for the courtroom to see, matches the logo of a private storage facility in town. A facility that is directly tied to Mr. Hollis. Murmurs filled the room. Hollis's lawyer protested loudly, but Judge Campbell silenced him with a bang of her gavel. Quiet, she commanded. Prosecutor Morgan, continue. Morgan stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. Your Honor, we've been investigating Mr. Hollis for months. We believe he used a storage unit under a false name to hide critical evidence, documents that could prove his involvement in the embezzlement scheme. This key might unlock that evidence. The courtroom buzzed with excitement and shock. Yet, Judge Campbell remained composed. Do you have enough to request a search warrant for this storage facility? She asked. Yes, Your Honor, Morgan replied, holding up a motion she had prepared earlier. Given this new evidence, I believe we have probable cause to search the facility immediately. Hollis's lawyer slammed his hand onto the table. This is madness. You can't base a search warrant on the actions of a stray dog. This is turning into a circus. Judge Campbell fixed him with a cold, steely glare. Mr. Carter, if your client has nothing to hide, then he has nothing to worry about. Prosecutor Morgan, your motion is granted. Bailiff, escort the prosecutor and ensure the warrant is executed without delay. The bailiff nodded and quickly left the courtroom with Morgan, the key clenched tightly in her hand. The dog, still sitting near Hollis, watched them leave, its tail swaying gently, as if pleased with the outcome. Hollis's face had gone from pale to ghostly, and he hissed something furiously to his lawyer, who struggled to maintain his composure. Judge Campbell addressed the room. We will adjourn until further notice. Bailiff, make sure the dog is taken care of and kept safe. This is unprecedented, but we must follow where the evidence leads. As the courtroom began to clear, whispers filled the air. Who was this dog? How had it known to bring the key? And what secrets would they find in the storage unit? Judge Campbell remained seated at her bench, watching as the dog was gently led out of the room. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of intrigue she hadn't experienced in ages. This was no ordinary case, and this was no ordinary dog. The courtroom emptied, but the mystery deepened. What secrets were hidden in that storage unit? And why had this stray dog been the one to unlock them? Outside the courtroom, the tension hung thick as Prosecutor Elaine Morgan and the bailiff sped toward the storage facility. The rusty key felt heavier in Morgan's hand with every step, like it was carrying the weight of the truth they were about to uncover. The dog's inexplicable actions played on her mind. What were the odds that this stray would lead them to the breakthrough they had been desperately searching for? Back in her chambers, Judge Campbell lingered, a lingering unease gnawing at her. There was something more to this case, something beyond what the eyes could see. Her mind kept drifting back to David Hollis's reaction. His discomfort had been unmistakable. There was more at play here than a simple legal battle. Much more. Meanwhile, in a private meeting room, David Hollis sat with his lawyer Carter, his calm facade rapidly crumbling under the weight of mounting pressure. "This can't be happening," he muttered, pacing back and forth, his mind racing. How did they even know about the storage unit? Carter, ever the reassuring presence, tried to calm him. "We don't know what they'll find. For all we know, that key could be meaningless." But Hollis wasn't buying it. He stopped pacing and stared out the window, his jaw clenched with frustration. If they find those documents, it's over. At the storage facility, Morgan and the bailiff arrived, the warrant in hand. The facility manager, a wiry man in his 60s, looked baffled as they explained their purpose. "You're saying this key came from a dog?" he asked, incredulous. Morgan nodded, her tone firm and unwavering. "Yes, and we believe it opens one of the units here." The manager shrugged, his confusion giving way to reluctant compliance. "Well, we'll see. Follow me." The three of them walked through the maze of storage units, and soon enough, they arrived at the one matching the serial number on the key. The tension in the air was palpable as Morgan slid the key into the lock. It clicked open with surprising ease, revealing the dark interior beyond. She flicked on a flashlight, and the beam revealed rows upon rows of file boxes, each stacked neatly and organized. Morgan stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened the nearest box, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside were ledgers, receipts, contracts, each page meticulously organized, each document telling a damning story of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. "This is it," Morgan whispered to herself. "We've got him." News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Chaos erupted in the courtroom as reporters scrambled to update their stories, whispers circulating through the air like electricity. Hollis's lawyer demanded a recess, but Judge Campbell's voice rang out, steady and authoritative. "We will proceed as planned," she declared, her voice resolute. "If the evidence is admissible, it will be presented." Hollis, visibly sweating, leaned over to Carter, his voice low and urgent. "You need to stop this," he hissed. "There's got to be a way to discredit that evidence." But Carter, his confidence beginning to slip, shook his head. "The key came directly from the dog, Hollis. This isn't something we can argue away." Meanwhile, the dog, now temporarily placed in the care of a local animal shelter, rested peacefully. The shelter staff marveled at the dog's calm demeanor. "Looks like he knows he's done something important," one of the workers remarked, scratching behind the dog's ears. They decided to name him Justice, a fitting tribute to the animal's unexpected heroism. Back at the courthouse, Morgan returned with boxes of damning evidence in tow. The room was standing room only, the atmosphere crackling with anticipation as she made her way to the front to present the first batch of documents. "Your Honor," she began, addressing Judge Campbell with unwavering authority. "These records confirm that Mr. Hollis has been siphoning funds from multiple charities into offshore accounts. The transactions are detailed and traceable, and this key," she held it up for emphasis, "was the missing link." The defense scrambled to object, but Judge Campbell waved them off. "Let her finish," Morgan continued, her voice steady and deliberate. "We believe these funds were intended for underprivileged children, medical research, and community housing projects. Instead, They were funneled into accounts owned by Mr. Hollis, using a variety of aliases. The room fell into a stunned silence as the weight of her words sank in. Hollis, whose face had already gone pale, flushed red, then white again, as the reality of the situation hit him. The confident businessman, who had once commanded every room, now looked like a cornered animal. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, Judge Campbell addressed the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented today, this court has sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Mr. Hollis, you are remanded into custody until further notice. The gavel struck with finality, and the room erupted into a frenzy. Reporters rushed to file their stories, spectators whispered in disbelief, and the prosecution exchanged quiet nods of satisfaction. But amidst the commotion, one question lingered in everyone's mind. How had the dog known to intervene? Outside the courtroom, Morgan paused, taking a deep breath. She gazed up at the gray sky, the weight of the day finally settling on her shoulders. As she walked toward her car, she couldn't help but think about Justice, the dog who had turned the case upside down. I sometimes think, she murmured to herself, the universe works in mysterious ways. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case progressed, but Morgan knew the story wasn't over. She had the evidence, and now the upper hand. Yet a gnawing feeling persisted, one she couldn't shake. The mystery of the stray dog still wasn't resolved. How had the animal come into possession of the key? And why had it appeared at such a critical moment? These questions swirled in her mind as the trial recessed for the day. Later that evening, as Morgan sat in her office, a call came in from the local animal shelter. The staff member on the other end sounded excited. "Miss Morgan, you need to come down here. It's about the dog, Justice. There's something you need to know." Intrigued, Morgan headed to the shelter. When she arrived, Justice greeted her with a wagging tail, his eyes warm and intelligent. A young woman named Carla, one of the shelter workers, handed Morgan a faded dog tag. "We didn't notice it earlier," Carla said, "but Justice had this tucked under his collar, hidden beneath the key. It looks like a name tag." Morgan examined the tag closely. The engraving was worn, but the name Max and an address on the outskirts of town were still visible. Curiosity piqued, Morgan decided to visit the address the next morning. The following day, Morgan arrived at the address listed on the tag, a small rundown farmhouse surrounded by overgrown grass. She knocked on the door, and an elderly man answered. His face lit up when he saw the tag in her hand. "Max," the man said, his voice choked with emotion. "You found my Max." Morgan explained the situation, telling him about the dog's heroic actions in the courtroom. The man, introducing himself as Henry, a retired locksmith, shared the story of how Max, his loyal German shepherd, had gone missing months ago during a storm. "I thought I'd lost him forever," Henry said, his voice trembling. "He's more than just a dog to me. He's family." Morgan then asked Henry if he recognized the key attached to Max's collar. Henry squinted at it, his expression shifting from joy to confusion. "That's one of my old keys," he said slowly. "Yeah, I used to make spare keys for people around town, but this one belongs to David Hollis." Morgan froze. "David Hollis? The defendant in our case?" Henry nodded, his brow furrowed. "Yes. Years ago, Hollis hired me to make keys for a private storage unit he owned. He said it was for business, but he paid me extra to keep quiet about it. I didn't think much of it at the time, but is this related to the trial?" Morgan's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place. Max must have stumbled upon the storage unit while wandering the town, finding the key and bringing it to the courtroom, guided by some incredible stroke of fate or instinct. The connection between Henry, Hollis, and the key was too significant to ignore. "Henry," Morgan said, her tone serious, "you might have just uncovered the missing link in our case. I need you to come with me to the courthouse and provide a statement." Back in the courtroom, the trial resumed, now charged with even greater anticipation. Hollis, visibly anxious, glanced nervously at his lawyer as Morgan prepared to present her latest findings. She introduced Henry to the court, explaining his connection to both the key and the defendant. "Your Honor," Morgan began, addressing Judge Campbell, "this is Henry Dawson, a retired locksmith who worked for Mr. Hollis several years ago. He has confirmed that the key brought to us by the stray dog Justice was made for a private storage unit owned by the defendant." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Hollis's lawyer immediately objected, claiming hearsay, but Judge Campbell overruled him. "Let the witness speak," she said firmly. Henry took the stand, recounting his story with surprising clarity for his age. He explained how Hollis had hired him under suspicious circumstances, paying him extra to remain silent. "I didn't know what he was hiding in that unit," Henry concluded, "but I knew it wasn't above board." Morgan then presented additional evidence from the storage unit, documents that directly tied Hollis to the embezzlement scheme. These records, combined with Mr. Dawson's testimony, establish a clear link between the defendant and the illegal activities we've uncovered, she stated confidently. Hollis's lawyer attempted to poke holes in the testimony, but the damage was done. The jury exchanged knowing glances, their skepticism toward Hollis growing by the minute. As the court adjourned for the day, Morgan couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. The case was unraveling in her favor, and Justice, the stray dog, had proven to be an unlikely hero. Yet, the mystery of how Max had ended up with the key still gnawed at her. Was it pure coincidence, or was there more to the story? That evening, Morgan visited the animal shelter once more. As she sat with Justice and scratched behind his ears, she reflected on the incredible chain of events that had brought them to this point. "You're more than just a dog, aren't you?" she murmured. Justice wagged his tail, his intelligent eyes meeting hers, as if to say, "You'll see." The courtroom was abuzz the following morning as the trial resumed. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The revelation about the key and its connection to the defendant had shifted the case dramatically, leaving David Hollis and his legal team visibly shaken. Judge Martha Campbell entered the room, her usual calm demeanor masking the curiosity swirling in her mind about how a stray dog had upended an intricate case. Hollis's defense team quickly moved to derail the narrative. "Your Honor," Morgan interjected swiftly, her voice calm but commanding, "I would like to request that these records be thoroughly examined before they are considered in this trial." Judge Campbell nodded, her expression unreadable. "I agree. We'll pause the proceedings for a brief recess to review this new evidence." As the courtroom emptied for the recess, Morgan's mind raced. If the defense was right and Justice, Max, had been trained for security work, it could complicate everything. The dog's actions in the case would no longer seem like spontaneous heroism, but rather a product of training. She couldn't let the jury get distracted by this new angle. They needed to see the bigger picture. Outside the courtroom, Henry Dawson, unaware of the defense's new revelations, paced anxiously. Justice sat beside him, his eyes focused on the door, as if sensing the weight of the situation. When Morgan approached, she found him deep in thought. "Henry," she said, her voice steady but urgent, "I need you to think back. Anything unusual about Justice's behavior before this trial started? Any sign that he had been trained?" Henry looked down at the dog, who was now lying calmly at his feet. "I honestly don't know, Miss Morgan. He always seemed like a good dog. but I never saw anything that stood out as unusual. I just took him in when he needed help. That's all I can say." Morgan nodded, her face set in determination. "It's okay. I need you to stay calm. This doesn't change the truth of what justice did for us. His actions are still what matters most here." The tension in the courtroom was palpable when the trial resumed. Carter stood with his folder, looking victorious, as he addressed the judge and jury. "Your Honor, as I mentioned earlier, we have records indicating that Justice, or Max as his true name appears to be, was a trained security dog. His purpose at the crime scene wasn't as random as the prosecution suggests. He was trained to retrieve objects, and the key he brought to Mr. Dawson might have been part of a pre-planned operation." Morgan stood to respond, her voice calm but unwavering. "Your Honor, I believe the defense is trying to confuse the jury with irrelevant details. Justice's actions, while possibly influenced by prior training, were not malicious or coordinated in any way. The key was brought to Mr. Dawson because of Justice's bond with him, not because of a predetermined plan." She turned to the jury, her gaze locking with theirs. "What matters is not whether Justice was trained. What matters is that Justice acted out of instinct, loyalty, and a desire to protect the people he cared for. His actions led us to the key, and the key led us to the evidence that has brought us here today." The jury seemed to stir, the weight of the argument sinking in. The defense, sensing that their latest strategy wasn't having the desired effect, quickly regrouped. As the proceedings wore on, Morgan's team worked relentlessly behind the scenes, trying to uncover every detail of the new evidence. They managed to confirm that the K9 records were legitimate, but they also found discrepancies suggesting that the defense had selectively edited their interpretation to cast doubt on Justice's character. In the closing hours of the trial, Morgan took one last step to ensure the truth was heard. She called Dr. Sarah Bennett back to the stand. The animal behaviorist had seen Justice's instincts in action, and now, more than ever, her testimony was crucial. "Dr. Bennett," Morgan began, her voice clear and decisive, "is there any reason to believe that Justice's actions at the crime scene were anything other than protective?" Dr. Bennett met her gaze, her expression resolute. "No, Ms. Morgan. Based on my expertise and my observations of Justice, I can say with confidence that his actions were driven by a desire to protect and help. He acted with courage and intelligence." Morgan turned to the jury. "It doesn't matter what records the defense has unearthed. The truth is clear. Justice was not just a dog trained to retrieve things. He was a dog with an unwavering sense of loyalty, doing what he felt was right in that moment." The courtroom was silent for a long moment as the jury absorbed the weight of Morgan's words. Hollis, meanwhile, looked increasingly defeated. His once confident demeanor had cracked, his desperation growing clearer with each passing day. As the trial continued, it became apparent that the emotional story of Justice, combined with the unshakable facts of the case, had tipped the balance in the prosecution's favor. Even the most skeptical jurors were beginning to see beyond the distractions the defense had thrown their way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Campbell called for closing statements. Morgan stood, facing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't just about one man's guilt or innocence. It's about the truth. How sometimes, in the most unlikely of ways, the truth reveals itself. And in this case, that truth was brought to us by a dog. A dog who saw what others couldn't, who acted when others hesitated, and who brought us the evidence we needed to see." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Justice's role in this trial might have seemed extraordinary, but in reality, It was no more than the natural result of his loyalty and instinct. These are qualities that we admire in people, and they should be celebrated when we see them in animals too. The jury seemed to hold their breath as Morgan concluded. We all have a responsibility to seek the truth, and it's clear that justice did just that. I ask you to do the same, to see past the distractions, the manipulations, and the doubts, and to deliver a verdict based on the facts. When she finished, there was a palpable silence in the courtroom. Hollis sat rigidly in his chair, his face ashen, his future uncertain. After a tense deliberation, the jury returned and the verdict was read aloud. Guilty. Hollis's fate had been sealed. Morgan allowed herself a small, quiet smile. The case had been long, complicated, and filled with twists, but in the end, truth had prevailed. As she walked out of the courtroom, she glanced at Henry Dawson and Justice, who were waiting for her. Justice's tail wagged in recognition, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world again. The trial was over, but the bond between man and dog would remain forever imprinted in their lives, and in the lives of all who had witnessed it. Morgan turned to her assistant, a young paralegal named Ava, who had been instrumental in gathering evidence for the case. We need to verify the authenticity of these records and find out why Hollis's team waited until now to bring this forward. Ava nodded, her fingers already flying over the laptop keyboard. On it. If the records are real, there has to be more to the story. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the jury's perception of justice was beginning to shift. The defense's revelation had planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that the dog's actions might have been orchestrated or influenced by prior training. Carter seized the opportunity to cast further doubt by calling a former trainer from the K9 facility to testify. The trainer, a gruff man named Martin Hayes, took the stand with a confident demeanor. "Yes, I remember Max," he said, when asked about Justice. "He was one of the best dogs we ever trained, sharp, obedient, and incredibly loyal." Carter leaned forward, his tone measured. "Mr. Hayes, could you describe the kind of training Max received?" "Of course," Hayes replied. "He was trained in retrieval, tracking, and object recognition. If you gave him a command, he'd follow it without hesitation." Carter smiled faintly, turning to the jury. "So, it's fair to say that Max's ability to find and retrieve the key was a result of his training, not some miraculous instinct." Hayes hesitated, glancing at Justice, who was lying quietly at Henry Dawson's feet. "I suppose you could say that," he admitted, though his voice lacked conviction. When Morgan took her turn to cross-examine Hayes, she focused on the gaps in his testimony. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "you mentioned that Justice, or Max, was trained at your facility. Can you confirm whether he was still under your care or Hollis's employ at the time of the events in question?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "No, he wasn't. He'd been missing for years. We assumed he was either stolen or abandoned." Morgan seized the opportunity. "So you can't definitively say that his actions during this case were influenced by his training under your program?" Hayes hesitated. "No, I can't." Morgan nodded, turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a dog who, despite being abandoned and left to fend for himself, demonstrated remarkable intelligence and loyalty. His training may have been a part of his past, but his actions in this case were his own. A testament to the bond between humans and animals and the extraordinary nature of this particular dog." Outside the courtroom, Ava returned with new information that turned the tide once again. She had uncovered a series of emails between Hollis and the K9 training facility, revealing that Hollis had deliberately abandoned Justice after a failed security job, deeming him useless. The emails painted a damning picture of Hollis's disregard for the animals in his care. Morgan wasted no time presenting the emails as evidence. "Your Honor," she said, addressing Judge Campbell, "these emails show that the defendant not only abandoned justice, but also demonstrated a pattern of cruelty and negligence toward the animals under his employ. Justice's role in this case is not a coincidence, it's poetic justice." The jury's expression shifted once more, their initial doubts giving way to renewed conviction. Hollis's actions were not only criminal, but deeply unethical, and Justice's actions now carried even greater weight. As the day ended, Morgan reflected on the escalating tension and the intricate web of revelations that had unfolded. The defense's attempts to undermine Justice's role had backfired spectacularly, revealing even more about Hollis's character and solidifying the dog's role as a hero in the eyes of the jury. Justice, as if sensing the shift, rested his head on Henry's knee, his eyes calm and trusting. Morgan couldn't help but smile. The case was far from over, but she knew they were one step closer to the truth and to justice. The courtroom had become a stage for a drama no one had anticipated. Each day seemed to bring new revelations, and the case now transcended the mere facts of the crime. It was about loyalty, redemption, and the unexpected heroes that could emerge from the most unlikely places. The following morning, Morgan arrived at the courthouse feeling cautiously optimistic. The emails Ava had uncovered had shaken the defense's confidence, and the jury appeared to be leaning toward the prosecution's narrative. However, Morgan knew she couldn't rely solely on the emotional pull of Justice's story. She needed to solidify their case with indisputable evidence. Before the trial resumed, Morgan met with Henry Dawson and Justice in a quiet corner of the courthouse. Justice wagged his tail as Henry scratched behind his ears. "He's something special," Henry said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've never seen a dog like him." Morgan nodded. "He's the heart of this case, Henry. But we need more than that to ensure Hollis is held accountable. We have to connect every detail and every piece of evidence." Henry looked thoughtful. "What if Justice can help us again? He's led us this far." Morgan offered a faint smile. "We'll see. But for now, let's focus on the facts we've gathered." In the courtroom, Morgan called Detective Elena Ruiz to the stand. Detective Ruiz had played a pivotal role in recovering the physical evidence from Hollis's property, including stolen items that were directly tied to the crime. Her testimony was crucial to cementing a timeline that could leave no room for doubt. "Detective Ruiz," Morgan began, "can you describe the scene when you searched the defendant's property?" Ruiz leaned forward, her tone deliberate and professional. "We discovered several items matching the descriptions provided by the victim's family: antique watches, jewelry, and other valuables. They were hidden in a locked storage unit behind the defendant's house." Morgan gestured toward the evidence table. "And how did you gain access to that storage unit?" Ruiz glanced toward Justice, who lay calmly at Henry's feet. "The key to the unit was provided by Mr. Dawson, who received it from Justice. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to search the unit." Morgan turned to the jury, her gaze steady. "So, Justice's actions were instrumental in uncovering evidence critical to this case?" Ruiz nodded. "That's correct." As Morgan stepped back, Carter rose for his cross-examination. He attempted to minimize the significance of Ruiz's testimony, insinuating that the evidence could have been planted or obtained under questionable circumstances. But Ruiz's calm and methodical responses left little room for doubt. Frustrated, Carter redirected his focus to Justice. "Detective Ruiz, wouldn't you agree that relying on a dog to provide evidence is highly unconventional?" Ruiz didn't hesitate. "Perhaps, But unconventional doesn't equate to unreliable. Justice's actions were in line with his instincts and training. He's been a vital asset to this investigation. Carter pressed further, but the jury's expression indicated they were no longer swayed by his tactics. The bond between Justice and the case was undeniable, and it was growing increasingly clear that Carter's efforts were falling flat. During the lunch recess, Morgan and Ava huddled together to strategize for the afternoon. Ava had uncovered additional information about Hollis's past, including records showing payments made to the K9 training facility. These documents hinted at a much deeper involvement in the illegal trade of trained animals. "This might be the break we've been waiting for," Ava said, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "If we can connect these payments to the dogs Hollis abandoned, it strengthens our case and shows a clear pattern of his criminal behavior." Morgan scanned the papers carefully. "If we can prove Hollis exploited these dogs and then discarded them when they were no longer useful, it'll expose his complete disregard for both human and animal lives." When court resumed, Morgan presented the newly discovered documents. They revealed transactions between Hollis and several questionable organizations, including purchases of trained K9s. The jury was captivated as Morgan outlined how these dealings connected to Justice's past and Hollis's broader criminal operation. "Hollis didn't just steal," Morgan said, her voice firm. "He exploited these animals for his own gain, showing a complete lack of empathy. Justice's role here is more than a coincidence. It's poetic justice." The jury's reaction was immediate, their skepticism visibly shifting. The weight of Hollis's actions was becoming undeniably clear, and the emotional undercurrent of the trial grew stronger with each passing moment. Morgan then decided to call Henry Dawson back to the stand. She knew it was important to remind the jury of the human connection in this case, the way Justice had bridged the gap and helped reveal the truth. "Mr. Dawson," Morgan asked, "can you describe how Justice has impacted your life since he showed up at your doorstep?" Henry smiled warmly, glancing at the dog who sat loyally by his side. "Justice saved me just as much as I saved him. My farm was struggling, and I was lonely. Then he showed up, carrying that key and changing everything. He's not just a dog, he's a miracle." Morgan nodded. "And do you believe Justice's actions in this case were intentional? That he understood what he was doing?" Henry's voice remained steady, full of conviction. "I do. He's got a heart bigger than most people I've met. He knew what was right, and he acted on it." As Henry left the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. Justice wagged his tail, sensing the growing support around him. Morgan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The connections between the key players, Henry, Justice, and even Hollis, had been laid bare, and the narrative was becoming impossible to ignore. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation as the trial entered its most critical stage. Every piece of evidence, every witness, and every action Justice had taken was leading to this pivotal moment. The prosecution and defense were locked in a battle of wits, each side determined to sway the jury's decision. For Morgan, this was the moment she had been preparing for, the time to seal Hollis's fate. As the day began, Carter took one last swing at regaining control of the narrative. He sought to undermine the prosecution's emotional appeal by focusing on the cold, hard facts of the case. If he could discredit Justice's role, he might still have a chance to sway the jury. He called a private investigator hired by the defense, a stern man named Grayson Hill, to scrutinize Justice's involvement. Hill took his seat with a composed demeanor, ready for the cross-examination. Carter wasted no time launching his line of questioning, eager to poke holes in the defense's arguments. The battle was far from over. Carter turned to the witness, Grayson Hill, and asked, "Questions, Mr. Hill. In your expert opinion, could the actions of this dog, Justice, be seen as a coincidence rather than an intentional act?" Hill nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. Dogs often act on instinct, and what may seem deliberate could just be chance." Carter smiled, as though this single statement had disarmed the prosecution's entire case. "So, you're suggesting that it's unlikely that Justice intentionally retrieved the key related to the crime?" Hill shrugged. "Yes, unlikely. Without more concrete evidence, we can't definitively say the dog knew what he was doing." Morgan stood up, her calm exterior hiding a sharp determination. She approached Hill, her steps measured, her voice steady. "Mr. Hill, are you a certified animal behaviorist?" Hill blinked, caught off guard. "No, I'm not." Morgan's tone didn't waver. "So your opinion on Justice's behavior is based purely on speculation?" Hill hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I suppose you could say that," Morgan nodded, her expression resolute. "Thank you, Mr. Hill. No further questions." Her words hit home, exposing the flimsy foundation of the defense's argument. The jury's attention seemed to shift, their focus returning to the solid facts of the case. Next, Morgan called on AA, the analyst who had meticulously pieced together crucial evidence, including surveillance footage, cell data, and witness testimonies. AA took the stand and began walking the jury through the sequence of events using visuals displayed on the courtroom screens. "This footage shows Justice approaching the shed where the key was hidden," AA explained, pointing to a grainy video clip. "And here, you can see him returning to Mr. Dawson with the key in his mouth." Morgan turned to the jury, her voice firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was no random act. Justice's actions were deliberate, and they led us directly to the evidence that unraveled the defendant's crimes." Carter quickly objected, claiming that the footage was circumstantial and didn't prove intent. Judge Campbell allowed the objection, but permitted Morgan to continue. Despite the defense's efforts to undercut the evidence, the prosecution's case was steadily gaining ground. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew charged. Hollis Mount, who had maintained a stoic facade throughout the trial, was visibly unsettled. His lawyer whispered to him frequently, trying to keep him composed, but the cracks in his demeanor were becoming undeniable. The turning point came when Morgan called her final witness, a former employee of Hollis who had come forward with explosive information. Clara Evans, a young woman with a nervous tremor in her hands, took the stand and swore to tell the truth. "Ms. Evans," Morgan began, her voice calm yet commanding, "can you tell the court about your experience working for Mr. Hollis?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Hollis before speaking. "I worked for him for 3 years. At first, it seemed like a normal job, but over time, I realized there were things happening that weren't right." Morgan nodded sympathetically, urging her to continue. "What kind of things?" Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "He was involved in illegal activities, smuggling rare items and animals. Justice was one of the dogs he used for these operations. When Justice failed a mission, he abandoned him." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Campbell quickly banged his gavel, calling for order. Morgan, seizing the opportunity, raised her voice with authority. "Ms. Evans, are you telling this court that the defendant not only committed theft, but also exploited animals like Justice for his criminal activities?" "Yes," Clara replied, her voice growing stronger. "Justice was trained to retrieve items for him. But when he didn't perform to Hollis's expectations, he was abandoned, left to fend for himself." Morgan turned toward the jury, her expression fierce. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not just about theft. It's about a man who exploited and discarded living creatures for his own gain. Justice didn't just find the key, he sought redemption for the mistreatment he endured. And by doing so, he exposed the truth about David Hollis. Hollis's lawyer objected, but it was too late. The impact of Clara's testimony was palpable. The jury's expressions revealed the emotional weight of what they had just heard, and the case was beginning to fall into place. The tension in the room reached a crescendo as the trial neared its climax. Both sides had laid out their arguments, and the jury was hanging on every word. For Morgan, this was more than just about presenting facts. It was about telling a story so compelling that the jury couldn't ignore it. A story of justice, redemption, and the unlikely hero in the form of a dog named Justice. The next day, the defense made a bold move by putting David Hollis on the stand. It was a calculated risk. Carter hoped Hollis could present himself as a misunderstood businessman, wrongfully accused, but Morgan saw it as an opportunity to deconstruct his narrative piece by piece. Hollis entered the courtroom with an air of confidence, though there was something guarded about his demeanor. Carter began with soft, sympathetic questions, painting Hollis as a hard-working man who had been unjustly targeted. "Mr. Hollis, can you tell us about your business and how you've contributed to the community?" Carter asked. Hollis nodded, his voice measured. "I've run a successful logistics company for over a decade. We've provided jobs, supported local charities, and helped countless businesses." Carter turned to the jury, his tone implying, "See? He's just a regular guy." But Morgan was already preparing for her turn, ready to dismantle Hollis's carefully crafted image. When it was her time for cross-examination, Morgan's voice was calm, but her questions were sharp. "Mr. Hollis, you've described yourself as a community leader, but can you explain why multiple witnesses have testified that you were involved in illegal trafficking?" Hollis stiffened, his previous confidence faltering. "Those are baseless accusations." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Baseless? Clara Evans testified under oath about your involvement. Are you saying she lied?" Hollis hesitated, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm saying she's mistaken." Morgan leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "Mistaken about the forged documents, the stolen goods, and the trained dogs you abandoned when they no longer met your expectations." The room fell silent. All eyes were on Hollis, who shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Morgan pressed on. "Let's talk about Justice. Witnesses have confirmed that he was trained under your supervision. Can you deny that?" Hollis's jaw tightened. "I didn't personally train him." Morgan's voice was cutting. "But you knew about it. And when he didn't meet your expectations, you abandoned him. Isn't that true?" Hollis tried to deflect, but Morgan wasn't finished. "That's not relevant to this case," he muttered, but his words were hollow. The courtroom held its breath, and Morgan knew that the cracks in Hollis's story were now evident for all to see. Morgan's voice rose slightly, her passion unmistakable. "It's entirely relevant. Justice's actions led directly to the discovery of the key, the stolen goods, and ultimately, your criminal activities. He's not just a dog in this case, Mr. Hollis. He's both a victim and a hero." Hollis stepped down from the stand, visibly shaken. Morgan turned to face the jury, her expression firm, knowing the moment had arrived for her final argument. She began by recounting Justice's journey, from the abandoned dog to a courtroom hero. "Justice was cast aside as if he didn't matter," she said, her voice steady but emotionally charged. "But he didn't give up. He found his way to Henry Dawson, and when the time came, he did what no one else could. He uncovered the truth." Morgan's gaze sharpened as she shifted her focus to Hollis. "On the other hand, We have a man who exploited animals, broke the law, and tried to cover his tracks. He thought he could get away with it, but justice had other plans. Carter's closing arguments were subdued, his voice faltering as he tried to sow doubt in the prosecution's narrative. He suggested that the evidence was circumstantial and that Justice's actions could have been purely coincidental. But his words lacked conviction, and it was clear that the jury was no longer buying his claims. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the courtroom emptied, leaving only Morgan, Henry, and Justice to wait in a tense silence. Henry stroked Justice's fur, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and worry. "Do you think they'll see the truth?" he asked, his voice low. Morgan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, giving him a confident smile. "They have everything they need to make the right decision." Hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom filled once more with the buzz of anticipation, and everyone sat on edge, waiting for the verdict. The foreperson stood, holding the small slip of paper that would determine Hollis's fate. "In the matter of David Hollis," the foreperson read, "we find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Henry immediately pulled Justice into a tight embrace, tears streaming down his face. Morgan closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of the moment wash over her. In that instant, she knew they had done it. Outside the courthouse, reporters quickly swarmed, eager for a statement. Morgan addressed the crowd, her voice resolute and unwavering. "This case was about more than just theft," she began, her tone powerful. "It was about loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Justice reminded us all of what's truly important, and I hope this serves as a reminder to protect and cherish every life." Henry, his voice thick with emotion, spoke next. "Justice saved my life in more ways than one. I'll never forget what he's done for me in this community." As the crowd cheered, cameras flashing in every direction, Justice stood calmly by Henry's side, his tail wagging gently. Unfazed by the attention, he had done exactly what he was meant to do. And now, he was ready to return home to a farm where he was loved, valued, and finally at peace. Inside the courtroom, the buzz of relief still hung in the air. While the announcement of Hollis's guilt brought a quiet wave of cheers, the true emotional peak of the story had yet to arrive. For Henry, Morgan, and Justice, the moment was about more than just a legal victory. It was about closure, justice, and redemption. As the court emptied, Judge Campbell called for Henry, Morgan, and Justice to come forward. The judge, who had presided over hundreds of cases, looked down at the dog sitting quietly by Henry's side, his tail wagging ever so slightly. "I've seen many cases in my time," Judge Campbell said, his voice softening, "but I've never seen anything like this. Justice isn't just a dog. He's a symbol of loyalty and courage. Henry, you're lucky to have him, and I believe this community is lucky to have both of you." Henry's voice cracked with emotion as he replied, "Your Honor, I think I'm the lucky one. Justice saved my life twice. I'll never be able to repay him for what he's done." The judge nodded solemnly. "Sometimes, Henry, the best way to repay loyalty is with love. And from what I've seen, Justice is already receiving plenty of that." Morgan, standing beside Henry, felt a swell of pride, not just for the case, but for the profound bond between Henry and Justice. "Your Honor," she interjected softly, "Justice didn't just save Henry. He brought the truth to light, something that might never have happened without him." Judge Campbell smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling. "That he did. And it's a lesson for all of us to trust in the unexpected and recognize the extraordinary in what we often overlook. Outside the courthouse, the press was eager to catch a glimpse of Justice, now a local hero. Cameras flashed as Morgan, Henry, and Justice stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The crowd erupted in cheers, some holding signs that read, "Justice for Justice" and "Hero Dog of the Year." A reporter called out, "Henry, what's next for Justice?" Henry smiled, ruffling the fur on Justice's neck. "He's going back to the farm where he belongs. He's earned a quiet life, but I think he'll always be ready for the next adventure." A reporter turned to Morgan, eager for one last insight. "Do you think this case will set a precedent?" Morgan nodded firmly, her voice resolute. "Absolutely. This case isn't just about one man's crimes or one dog's actions. It's a reminder of the incredible bonds between humans and animals and the importance of justice for all, regardless of species." As the media frenzy continued, a small group from the local animal shelter approached Henry, holding a plaque. The inscription read, "In honor of justice, for loyalty, courage, and unwavering devotion." Henry took the plaque in his hands, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is for justice, but it's also for every animal that's been abandoned or mistreated. Justice reminds us that every life has value and every soul deserves a chance." The crowd erupted in applause, and in a joyful response, Justice barked, his enthusiastic sound lifting the spirits of everyone gathered. Laughter and tears mingled in the air, cementing Justice's status not only as a hero, but as a beloved member of the community. That evening, Henry, Morgan, and Justice returned to the farm. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the fields. Henry stood by the fence, gazing at his animals grazing peacefully, while Justice lay contentedly at his feet, his head resting on his paws. Morgan joined him, a soft smile gracing her lips. "It feels like the storm has finally passed," she said quietly. Henry nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I never thought I'd see the day when everything would feel right again. Justice brought me back to life, Morgan. I owe him everything." Morgan reached down to gently scratch behind Justice's ears. "I think he knows that. And I think he feels the same way about you." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Henry knelt beside Justice, speaking to him as if he were an old friend. "You've done more than I could ever have asked, buddy. You've given me hope again. I promise you'll always have a home here." In response, Justice licked Henry's hand, his tail wagging slowly but steadily. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, a bond forged through hardship and sealed with love. In the weeks that followed, Justice became a local legend. Schools invited Henry to speak about their incredible journey, using their story to teach resilience and compassion. Justice accompanied him, sitting proudly by his side as children listened with wide-eyed wonder, captivated by the tale of a dog who had saved his owner and exposed a criminal. Morgan was also inspired by the case. She launched a community initiative focused on supporting abandoned animals, using Justice's story as a beacon of hope. The program, named Justice's Legacy, aimed to ensure that no animal would ever be forgotten or unloved again. As for Hollis, the consequences of his actions rippled through the community. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his businesses soon crumbled under the weight of his criminal activities. The justice system had worked, but it was Justice, the dog, who had brought the final truth to light. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. And remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, can make a world of difference. See you in the next story.